Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Kristen, I have a question probably for you and Tammy, just real quick while people are arriving. Is there a time of day deadline for the slides for healthy housing? Could it be within the day Monday, or did it need to be in the morning?
I think we said
Monday, end of day.
End
Yeah,
of day?
I think I said end of day.
Thanks, Tammy.
I realize what that means. Because then people go, well, nobody's going to look at him if I send him at 5:30 or midnight.
Oh, well, I set from 5 PM is what I have on my calendar, and I will get them done by then because I can't have them bleed into Tuesday prep. So
And they're not supposed to be very fancy.
right, no, they're a low lift. I'm just not doing it until Monday morning, and
Mhm.
if that's a problem, I will do them sooner. But if I can do them Monday morning, and I'm gonna get John's approval, and then I'll send them by 5 PM.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's really just in time that Kristen can come in Tuesday morning and hound the people who didn't send them.
Okay.
I'm so bummed you can't come, Chris. But it would have been fun to have you, but next time maybe.
I know. Yeah, I will definitely try for next time.
I don't know how often we're going to do this. It took us like 2 years to set it up.
Well, yeah, hopefully I'll be around for another 20. So
Yeah. Yeah. We'll try to keep inviting you. Okay, I don't know who all we're expecting, but maybe we should get started. Let's see, Ryan, Stacy. I think Stacy's out. I think there were a couple people marked out. And then Narasimha said that he had the last minute needed to be on with DOE. So I would like to start by introducing Naomi, even though she was not on the agenda. Naomi is working on the Sapphires project on a concept that we're seeking to define called systemic intervention, where you tie into the workforce and you tie into the people and you look at how effective it's going to be. So you can see that this bleeds over to Sapphires a lot. Do you want to say something about yourself, Naomi?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Naomi. Yeah, I'm the new postdoc. I got my PhD from UNC Chapel Hill. I was co-advised by Barb Turpin and Glenn Morrison, and I worked on PFAS in the indoor environment. And I'm really excited to work with all of you and learn from you.
And I think you've got a lot of contextual background, Naomi. PFAS is, for those of you who are not engineers, are chemicals that stay around forever and we can't seem to get rid of them, but oops, we accidentally started releasing them. But I think Naomi's worked on stove changeouts for her master's degree, working with, or at least in concert with was it with the Navajo Nation?
Yeah, we worked with Navajo EPA and then students from Diné College, which is a tribal college located there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then time in the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not your standard engineer. And so Naomi may end up working on things that have been related to respect, because she's only been here a month. Is it a month already? No, not quite.
Not quite.
Not quite. Okay, not even a month. A couple of weeks. We're starting with just a deep dive into that aspect of Sapphires. But I thought she would benefit from hearing what we discuss in respect, so she can come whenever she wants. And then I wanted to check on the meeting time for this semester. For those of us who are on semesters, it's 9 a.m. Is this work? We're all here, so it's kind of dumb because the semester started, anybody who is not working for it isn't here. So maybe I did that badly. Narasima didn't say, Stacy's not teaching. Is there anyone who wants to complain who's here?
I'm just gonna leave a few minutes early, but it works for me usually. So
Okay, you're teaching like right at 10. Okay, cool. Then I'll try to call on you early then. And I will check with people who aren't here, or Kristen can check. I'm not sure how far out I have sent the invites, so I will look into that, but I didn't want to extend them until I knew what we were doing. Okay, and then Ellison, I'm gonna let you take the rest. You sent out a getting to know you question, and then your work on, or our work on ACEEE.
Yep, so I put in the chat just now an order for a getting to know you prompt, and the prompt I sent out was, what is one of your most deeply rooted beliefs about how you learn? So I will go first, maybe give people some time to remember what they thought when they saw it, or come up with their answer for the first time. I think one that came to my mind as I was thinking about this is a belief, or I have, that I strongly prefer to think alone, without much input, no internet, no reading. I like to figure out what I think first, and it sometimes takes a long time. So before I get told how things work. So I don't know, that's something that feels like has been a part of my learning process since I was a small child. And yeah, so that's my answer. Ryan, you're next.
I feel like if I hear somebody say something, I can learn it, which maybe is a little weird. Like I always tell my students, oh, lectures aren't effective, but I'm actually the weird kind of person who like I can sit through a lecture and like pick it up way better than I do like reading a book.
Huh.
So
Wow.
I have this problem though, like I'm working on this literature review for the paper Chris is reading, and I can remember things people said in their presentations and have no idea what the sites are. So I have to go back, work that out.
Wow, that's cool. Thanks, Ryan. Chris, you're next.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty visual, I think. I mean, having said that, like Ryan, I can reflect back on if I'm just focusing on learning in this kind of context, lectures were always effective. Reading was effective to an extent, but I feel like I learned actually more from the conversations that were had. But when it comes to other forms of learning, it's very visual because I cannot cook anything. So if I don't have a very specific set of directions in front of me about when to stir and what to add in, it's going to turn out to be a disaster. And the same thing comes with assembly. I can't just simply unpackage something and put it together. I have to have a step-by-step procedure with all the right tools. And yeah, so I think for me, it kind of depends on the context, I guess.
Yeah, those are great examples. Thanks, Chris. Next is Kristen.
So when I first thought of this question, I thought, okay, growth mindset, because I think of like failures and that's a learning process. But as we're talking about it, it really, I would love to just say, like, I learn by doing. Like, you can tell me that all the steps and everything, but unless I do it, I will not learn it. Like, I have to do and physically get my hands dirty and just get in there. And so that's how I learn, and I remember, and then I fail and I learn more and as I go on. So yeah.
Thanks, Kristen. All right, Zara, you're next.
For me, it's like I should learn by myself. I mean, if someone explain a concept for me, I didn't like doing the learning by just listening to a lecture or other things. I like at the lectures, I mostly write some keywords and do the learning later.
Thanks, Sarah. Karthik, I think you're next.
Yeah, I think mine is writing. So if I write something down, then I learn or remember it. I guess that's how I probably peaked in middle school and high school, and then it's been downhill since then. But but I think even when it comes to biking, because I don't like to use my phone when I'm biking, so I draw down the directions on a piece of paper. I don't look at it, but that's just how I remember it because I've drawn it down, and then that's how I go. So yeah, writing is my
Yeah.
method.
Thanks.
I'm
Karthik.
next.
Cool. Yeah, you're next.
Yeah, so I mostly learn by reading a lot, but what I'm really bad at finishing those paper or books. So there are so many papers or books in my in front of me, like I haven't finished that yet. So, but I interpret the finishing on my own, and sometimes it comes out very wrong. And when I go back to the paper and book and say that no, this is not something they were saying. So it's yeah, but I try to change it, but it's something I think inborn. I couldn't change it.
Yeah, yeah, that's the deeply rooted part. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, Tami, you're next.
Well, I have heard a little of myself in everything that people said, but I'm with Kristen. I have to immerse. And that's, that's like language or any physical principle. I have to do the problems and apply it. I look at equations and I'm like, yeah, sure, they're mathematically correct, but I don't get it until I made it through engineering by doing every problem that had an answer in the book.
Yeah. Thanks, Tami. Okay, Naomi.
Yeah, I think I've heard a little bit of how I learned and what everyone said as well. I think one thing for me is very much about the application to like the real world. Like if it's very theoretical, I find that I have a lot of trouble kind of wrapping my head around it and understanding the purpose of it. So I find now when I'm reading a lot of things, it's easier for me to understand if I can get an actual example of how the concept is being applied. Yeah.
Thanks, Naomi. Did I miss anyone? I don't think so. Okay. Yep. Thanks for doing getting to know you. And I'm at the powerhouse and there's conversations and leaf blowing and mowing going on. So I'm trying to not be distracted. Tami and I had proposed sharing out to the group about our time at ACEEE, the conference that was held in early August for the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. They meet every 2 years, and I think they're at their 32nd or 34th meetings. They've been meeting for over half a century. And we proposed an informal session. So I was going to focus this conversation on our particular session that we did and how that went, with some thoughts or questions about where to go from there. I think there's probably some interest in like what ACEEE was more broadly, and I got a small snapshot of that, and Tami stayed for longer and probably has even more. So something I could do if there's time at the end is say a little more about the conference overall. I could flip that, Tami, if you think we should go broad first. I didn't really discuss this before, we could go broad first and then go on the.
We could do a little bit. I was writing a message in, or
Chat. Mhm.
but yeah, okay, so there's my message. Sorry, I couldn't process two things at once.
Yeah.
So this was a zoom into part of what ACEEE does.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're really broad organization and intersect on a lot of aspects, well, on many aspects of society through the energy lens. And this particular event is called their summer study on buildings, like it says in the chat from Tami.
So I think I reviewed the conference a little bit. If you want a sense of how of the flavor, I have a spreadsheet that they shared to list out all the sessions and the themes. And I feel like the best way to get a glimpse of what was there is just scan that. Like they have a tab for each theme. And I can send that to people who are interested, so you can pop your name in the chat. We can say things, but I think if you want to get a sense of like, would I like to go to this conference? Is it interesting for me? You could very quickly gather that by looking at that spreadsheet.
Yeah, I agree very much. I mean, maybe to my, like, I think I was happy to go or to share impressions if people thought that would be useful, but I think it's far more useful to just spend 15 minutes. And you could spend longer, honestly. There's 13 different panels. So there were tabs for each of those. For every day, there were presentations on a panel, and a panel sort of represented a topical theme. And I would agree, Tami, that sharing that with people would be the most effective way to get a broad understanding of what was presented, at least this time. So I was going to talk mostly about what we did.
Yeah, but so I could say maybe like 5 minutes on what was there.
Sure.
And you can contribute. So, and I'll try to encapsulate it. First, I saw very few academics, and I realized that I'm so much happier at non-academic conferences because often I go to academic conferences and I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like, what a weird question, right? Like, how is this relevant? And they, as Naomi said, they're like, why do you care? Isn't that only for broader impacts for NSF? Like, no. So I felt at home in that way. There were presentations from nonprofit groups who had programs where they were trying to implement things in new ways. There were utility folks and people from national labs, maybe less of those, but they had a strong presence because they have the money. And there were a lot of very young professionals, and by young, I mean energetic. And there were also people who had been around for a long time. As Ellison said, it's been going on for decades. And so there were people who probably had been at the very first one. The format was nice because they had these 2 sessions of these theme presentations in the morning. All afternoon was typically devoted to informal sessions like the one that Ellison and I had. I'm old school, so I didn't download the app to see what the informal sessions were. But when I did, which was not until Wednesday, I discovered that there were probably 20 or so informal sessions, and they ranged in their degree of formality. The one that Ellison and I did, we tried to make very participatory. And then in the evening, there were plenaries. So they were very long days. And I will have to say that the plenaries were some of the least interesting. Like they got famous people, but they didn't make sure that they were interesting people or interesting speakers. And then at 9 o'clock when the plenary finished, then apparently if you were one of the young energetic people, you could go off to a happy hour, which I was not. We went back to the hotel. And so that, but I think some of the themes that were there that surprised me because of their prevalence were not just discussions of energy efficiency, but discussions of equity. There was a theme or a panel called equity, but actually it was talking about who was benefiting was present throughout many of the presentations. And the other thing was the ideas of about workforce, which is people weren't really talking about contractors very much, but they except that they were talking about training in and how to accomplish it. So so in addition to the programmatic things where there was a lot of, you know, we did this and then this many people participated and we saw how much energy people saved or couldn't. It was all a bunch of people trying to make things happen. And that was really nice. Some were more interesting presenters than others, as always happens. But like some were just some were like just made me think like, oh my God, I want to hire you, you know, or like I want you to be the king, right? Or the queen. I want you to bring this to life. And so there was some of that energy there where people were approaching the problem in creative ways. The problem being it was a lot focused on electrification and decarbonization. And it hasn't always been that way. It's only because now there's money for framing it that way, but a lot of people have been working on efficiency for a long time. So, and I will say I'm biased because I went all residential and not commercial. But oh, Naomi, for you, there's a thing called market transformation, which I would have never gone to because I'm not really a market person, but it is actually it seems to be like the opposite of it is resource acquisition. That's how I heard it framed. And so it's like, do you acquire resources, i.e. just go into homes and give people stuff, or do you change the market so that it's demanded? So I think I learned about how people discuss things too. That's all I have to say. Did you want to add to that, Ellison? Stuff that you saw, because we attended different sessions. Well, I don't think I was ever in a session with Ellison.
Yeah, I think we were at different places. When you talk, there are a lot of people there that are doing stuff and then talking about how that's going. So it does feel, it doesn't feel removed from reality. It feels like they're in the midst of working with whatever their stakeholders are. One thing that I thought I would add to that is it's not just doing at the household level. Like I did go to a number of presentations on building codes and building performance standards. That was probably the most thematically consistent I was in terms of trying to go to multiple of those. And I guess, Ryan, you came to my mind first because I felt like they were talking about things like policy with the little p and policy with the big P, and you would have probably gotten even, you know, significantly more than I did. I was trying to understand what that meant to have a theme on building performance standards and building codes, because I have my own concepts of those things, but more as they intersect on what I do, not as like a focal point of what I do. And those conversations were much less about individual residences, but still really held a lot of these themes around equity, and Justice 40 came up in many of the presentations that I went to. Something that I feel like I sound like I'm just pitching the conference. And I know in 2 years, we, you know, as a project team, we will be, you know, maybe dispersed in a lot of different ways and people have moved on, but I found myself coming away like, oh, if there were one thing that I had to go to as an academic for the rest of, if I had to pick it now for the rest of eternity, I would probably keep going back, because there was the richness of people that have been working in their
respective spaces for a long time, and the energy of new people coming in, and it didn't really feel like there was a lot of chafing, like conventional versus new. It was more, just a lot more fluid of like, we're learning from what people have done both in the past, and we're adding what people are bringing to the table as newcomers to these tasks. So that was
That's a great point.
refreshing. And not just refreshing, like, oh, it felt good. It felt like, oh, wow, this is productive then. Like, we're not discarding what's been done in the past at the expense of what was good about it. But we're also not like trying to hold to a status quo or way of doing things that feels exclusive of people that are new to the environment, or new to the group of people working in the spaces that go there. So
That's a great point. And I think, Ellison, when you get a field that has had as much up and down as energy efficiency has over the last, whatever, 50 years now, I would say,
yeah.
then there's usually some old gripey people who are like, "Oh, we tried that and it never works." And
Yeah.
that maybe maybe they were there and I didn't find them, but I did. There was a sense of graciousness, I think.
Yeah. Maybe one more point to add to that, just for, reporting out from my experience, less about past versus future, but more about diversity of solutions. So I went to a few presentations that were specific, or not presentations, a few blocks of time that had 3 presentations on natural gas and natural gas heat pumps. And what I found really, again, at a like content level, I learned things about what people are putting into homes or small businesses. So I learned about like the technical side of what the technology was, but I also felt like the room was really supportive of like diverse solutions, because the United States is a large country with a diversity of people. And so it didn't feel like, oh, we're the natural gas people in a sea of electrification pushes, and we're just trying to defend our space. And then, audience launches like grill type questions at them. It was really more like, under what conditions is this a right fit? What have you learned from your work? Because they were working in like northern cold climates in the Dakotas and Minnesota. And I think they found more common ground than I might observe at other conferences, where again, there's sort of like these turfs that people have where they're like, this is the way things should be solved. But it was just very open to like, well, yeah, this looks like it's working where you're working, and we want to learn from that. So I thought that was also nice.
We're going to take the whole time to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
I want to add one thing that I believe I got a sense of where there are people who are really programs that are really forward thinking, that if we wanted to talk to people, we should talk to those people. And so 2 that really stood out to me were it was CEE, Center for Energy Efficiency in Minnesota. And it was so funny. I saw one of their presentations like the day after Tim Walz had been named, and the presenter was like, and it was just like the energy was so funny.
Yeah. Cool.
And the other one is Energy Trust of Oregon. They really struck me as very thoughtful and bridging, like really practical on the ground, many things, and trying to put a lot of things together. I'm not saying that nobody else is doing good work, but those really struck me as people whose presentations I would go see again. Okay, I'm done. I will be done now.
Okay. I think this is just fine. I think I will switch to talking about the informal session we ran. I'd like to just refresh people's memory of what we did since they weren't there. And then, Tammy, I want to see if there's anything I missed, because I'm forgetting. And then I have a few of my own, like, as I've thought about it over the last few weeks, like what went well, what would it mean for moving forward? So, as Tammy said, the early morning, like the way the day is structured over these 5 or 6 days of the event are formal presentations, like blocks of time with 3 to 4 presentations twice in the morning, and then the afternoons are referred to as informal sessions and are meant to be more free form and conversational around topics that people like us can pitch. So we had proposed and got a slot for 2 hours to discuss representations of well-being in the context of residential household energy transitions. That was on Monday afternoon. People were fairly fresh. And I think we got around 20 people, 20 to 25 people that came. Given the space we had, it felt like a good size. We sat in a circle and had 5 questions that we had planned to work through. We worked through the first 3, we dropped the 4th one, and then moved to the 5th one. The first question was around your own concept of well-being personally, and had people do an affinity group mapping exercise with Post-its. Then we asked them to think about the people they serve or work with. How would they, what clusters from that affinity grouping exercise would be most relevant? Is there anything they would have added to that board? Once we shifted the frame from themselves to the people they serve or work with. And I'm blanking on. Maybe that's where we shifted, Tammy. So then we asked people about how how people are measuring or would like to measure well-being, and then ask them to put those measurement methods on the wall in 2 categories: easy to do or hard to do. So that was the arc of the 2-hour session. We spent a lot of time on the opener when we asked people to identify themselves, like who are they and what brought them to the room. It ended up being a lot of, I think maybe we think we would do that a little differently in the future. Because it sort of became like a personal backstory. There was a lot of like, I'm just glad to be in a space that values talking about well-being and non-energy impacts. So that took actually quite a lot of the time. Those are, I guess those are the concrete features of the experience. Is there anything you want to add, Tammy, before I go on to interpreting?
No, I think just a couple of things. The thing we cut out was we were going to present some framing of well-being and and how other people have structured it, and satisfiers and so on, even though we have not defined them well for ourselves. And that just felt wrong. It didn't feel like it would have flowed. It looked like it would have flowed when we were sketching it out, but then we just decided to skip it. And because of that other thing that Ellison mentioned, where people talked a lot, then we were short on time. I think, yeah, we can. Maybe one thing to mention is I think as a facilitator, I feel like I pay attention to juice. Like there's a certain level of juice in the room, and you can feel like whether people are kind of open or like how they're expressing themselves. I don't know how to describe it, but it feels intangible. And I felt like during that opening session where people were talking about their own well-being, the juice level sort of rose and people were feeling connected and happy. And then partly because we then asked them to talk about their programs, and I think partly because we got into this personal recitation, it kind of dropped, and I felt like it was hard to get back. And so I just thinking about how to structure future work and or what that meant for what came out. Because I also tend to value the things that come out when the juice level is high. And I yeah, sorry, I don't know how to express that, or if you know what I'm talking about, if I'm crazy, but I almost regret that we couldn't translate that to talking about the study participants. Like I would have liked to just take it in and channel that energy into, and how do we bring this to the people we serve. So I don't think we achieved that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so go ahead and interpret, Ellison. I may have introduced something that you were not intending.
Oh, no, I'm glad you brought that up. I would agree. I felt like maybe different. Felt like the energy was high when people are talking about their own, because the first question, I'm gonna get it right for you all, so you don't, I'm just making it up. Sorry, I wrote it down. What aspects of experience, like your life experience, matter to your own well-being? That was their first question. And it generated a lot of Post-it notes. I think, I don't know, I mean, I think it's worth talking about, since you brought it up, is like the room kind of flattened in terms of its energy. You know, people were getting up and stretching, they took a break to go walk out, like, which is fine. It's an informal session. It's supposed to be a space where that's okay. It wasn't anybody doing something wrong, but it was just less energetic. And maybe, you know, Chris, I wonder if you'd have a perspective on this, like, although I guess you've talked mostly with residents about themselves. I think people love talking about themselves. And they don't have as much energy to talk about really anything else. Like, I feel like part of it is the local maximum issue of like, there's no place to go higher than asking somebody about not just themselves, but themselves and what makes you happy. Like, that feels like there's no way we would go higher than that and maybe that's a bad assumption to make or to live with or accept. Like, maybe there is a way to channel it just to learn more, but I felt the same sort of trajectory, but it feels almost, it feels hard to imagine surmounting.
I think it could be done.
Okay.
I don't know how. It would take some tweaking.
Yeah. I think, yeah, because we only have about 10 minutes. And maybe this is saying the same thing that you said about we didn't get to what would it look like to communicate. So I think our goals going in were to learn about how people think where could we improve at both measuring non-energy impacts and then communicating those to people that would value that, whether it's decision makers or residents or co-contractors. We asked them at the end to consider your desire to communicate non-energy impacts of energy transitions. Like, to whom do you imagine in your mind who you would communicate those to, and then come up with the things you would use to communicate them and put them in these bins of easy and hard. What do I want to say? Yeah, maybe first I'll say on the easy and hard, they more or less broke out how like into more of a quantitative, like measure temperature, measure you know energy bills on the easy side, and the hard side were things like cultural heritage and connection to family and stories that I would say looked more qualitative. We have pictures from the Post-its that were put up so we could look at it more closely as a team, or if somebody wants to see them. But it seemed like the things on the easy side are easier to quantify and then compare, like, did things go up or down? Whereas the things on the hard side could be recorded, but would be hard to measure their value to themselves over time or to others, to other things that are of value. I think a takeaway I wanted to say, which I feel like it's always easier to say it in retrospect versus going in. I don't know that anything we learned surprised me. So I'm not that personally, I'm not sure what the goal of doing this again would be. Like, I don't think repeating what we did would lead to more insight. It would have to be done better or maybe modified for a different purpose. Because I think we mostly learned that people have a lot of ideas about what comprises their well-being. It's very diverse, it's very multifaceted, they're very engaged in talking about it. There's more limited experience or understanding of how to measure it in others or in the context of programs and energy transitions. And then the things that are easy to measure and the things that are hard to measure, I feel like we could have come up with 80 to 90% of those lists on our own. So the idea of like repeating this event doesn't hold as much motivation for me as learning from it what we would do differently. I'm not suggesting talking with people is a bad idea at all. Just that if we did it again, I don't think we'd learn anything new. So, and that's been on my mind, I think, because we're thinking about and writing this proposal for the NHPC, the National Home Performance Conference. And that one's maybe Tami and Zara and I met and talked about that, and I think it's already headed in a different direction, which is a good one that I'm excited about. But I guess I'm talking about what we did at ACEEE in light of like, well, what would it inform us doing next? Yeah, those are my points. Tami, is there anything you want to add?
Well, I agree with that, Ellison. And as you were saying that, I was realizing that I wanted to be surprised. I wanted to have an insight that I hadn't thought of.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was sort of disappointed, and I felt like I was glad that we had a discussion, but I didn't feel like anything new came out. I think one of our goals was to create or to identify people who may wish to engage on this topic further. And I think we did that because we have some names and contact information. But I feel like, and then I think there was a sense from the audience that they were hoping we could do something with the outputs. Like, we came, we told you the stuff, and now you will. and I feel like, okay, I should have thought of that, but I didn't expect to provide anything to them, so I don't know if I let them down. I'm sounding negative here. I don't feel negative that we did the session, but in retrospect, I think too much about what we should have done. Brian had a question in the chat.
Oh, yeah, I missed it. Okay. I'm curious if hard to measure also are just out of discipline things versus quantitative things. Social scientists quantify family connections all the time, for example. Yeah, I like your question. To unpack it just a little bit. One, I think because there's so few academics, there really weren't like, unless there are social scientists that are practicing social scientists for outside of an academic space. Oh, I'm sorry. I feel like I didn't quite answer this right. I think you could be right that the people in the room, their primary roles and responsibilities in their work and their expertise that led them to those jobs or that they developed through those jobs aren't the kinds of positions where they have expertise to quantify or measure things like family connections or cultural connection to culture. I guess the question back to you and maybe others that feel like they could represent it, is that something that happens a lot in practice, or I assume it's mostly an academic thing, but I could be wrong.
I think to me, it's not necessarily that like practiced people are doing it, but there is like there are people who take like academic measures, and what they do is they say, oh, this is something we can quantify, and then they communicate to people how to do it. And I think the obvious example there would be like if you look at all of like the EJ screen tools, people like, people like David have worked on, like that's essentially taking academic knowledge and making it and translating it, making it usable for people. I think like in my discipline, people have done a really good job of like thinking about like nonprofit social impacts a similar way of this is something that academics measured for a long time, and people in practical fields were like, this is really hard to measure. And we were like, no, we can do this. We can measure this. And so like just I do think like knowing that there are things that people in this field want to know about and are hard to measure, like that does give us some fruitful places to look, to me at least. Because like that's what many of us are good at, is measuring hard to measure things.
That's why you should have been there, Ryan. I'm not sure, Ellison, I don't think that most of the people there would have had technical training, because a lot of them had like business background or some kind of social science background where they then got a bachelor's degree and then became ingrained in a program or a master's degree or something. At least, I didn't do a sampling of everybody, obviously.
Yeah.
But maybe we should have treated it like that, Ryan. Maybe we should have I said, what would you like to measure? Like if you put a label on something, what would that be? And then we can go seeking it, instead of hoping that the people in the room would have the answer. I think one of the things we were doing was seeking people who also had answers and wanted to share them.
Also making me think, Ryan, that could be the basis for, I mean, again, this is like 2 years in the future, so maybe, but I don't know that I really want to debate whether there's worth finding other venues, but we could start from a premise of these are things we've learned that people repeatedly say are hard to measure, because they weren't terribly surprising. Like I don't think we need a lot of or I don't think we'd meet a lot of resistance to start from the premise that these things are hard to measure. Here's expertise of people that have been figuring this out. And then I think, questions that could arise could be around what would it look like to scale this to your work, or what would it look like to put this into practice? Because there seemed to be an appetite for talking about how to do stuff. And we got to the hard to measure stuff pretty late, and I'm not like I wouldn't have the expertise to have talked about how to do it anyway. So, but I like the point that knowledge probably, it already does exist. It's just maybe
Inaccessible in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say I wonder too if some of it's like it's been produced but not ever really thought about. It's like, how would somebody use it if they are going to people's homes and doing the electrification but want to communicate or learn about or measure non-energy impacts?
I think
I
in
think
general,
there's,
go ahead, Brian.
I think actually like Kartik and Narsima's work is like a good example of that, of that their work allows scaling of things that people have wanted to measure at a local scale for a long time, but haven't been able to.
Mhm.
And so like I think we already have people on our team who are doing this, and maybe that's like a communication thing. Yeah.
I think we were partly seeking the people who were on other teams who were doing
Well,
it.
no, I get that. I was just thinking about messaging what we are doing.
Yeah, yeah. But maybe for an audience who is doing programs, we should look at what they're seeking and what they would do with it. And maybe there was an intermediate place where we did not stop. I did observe that a lot of people are very interested in communicating non-energy benefits, and most of the time they don't know what to do. And so they're leaning on these things like, yeah, if you don't have combustion, then you're not breathing the combustion, so it's all indoor air quality, possibly thermal comfort. But when they talk about other things, they seem to have this, yeah, you're actually changing your way of dealing with your home. That is hard to quantify. And so I don't know how to get at that. Maybe Chris and Ryan watching people for talking to people for years, you guys would figure it out and or maybe already have the solution. Anyway, I did not hear anyone having a great package where I said, oh my gosh, we're so behind. We should go do what they're doing.
No,
That did not come out.
no, it didn't. Chris, just maybe a closing point, very specific. You might be interested in the photos of the Post-its, especially from the first two phases of the exercise, because there's just so much there. It'd be interesting maybe for you to just look at in light of the interviews you've been working
Yeah,
with.
no, I would like to see those just to sort of compare what ideas were coming to their minds right away.
Mm-hmm.
I will get him in the drive.
Great.
Thanks for the reminder. I'd completely forgotten about that.
I think that's all that I had to share. Thanks for listening and engaging in the discussion. I don't know, Tammy, if there's anything you want to say in closing, but otherwise I think we could adjourn.
Yeah, I don't have anything else. I'm more curious about other people's questions,
Yeah.
if they have any.
It's not really a question so much, but going back to the energy in the room, I guess one thing that I was thinking of is that when any kind of meeting starts, the energy usually defaults at a sort of a higher level than at the end.
Mm-hmm.
That you could save the high energy things that you know are relatively high energy for the end,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of flip the script a little bit.
Mm.
Not to say that you should, repeat the whole process again, but just some of the things that you know generate a lot of interest, you could actually sort of have that be the icing on the cake.
That's a great point, Chris. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, good idea. By the way, anyone who is interested in thinking about meetings, I mean, I know we need more meetings, but The Art of Gathering is a really interesting book, a quick read. And the author talks about the almost the vestibule of the beginning of a meeting and then the meeting like how you invite people is really important, and then the closing, and I think we just like start a meeting and then we end it, but anyway, I cannot remember her last name, but it's anyway, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, recommend it. Okay, folks, well, thank you for joining and listening and talking. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.